Hi, thanks for joining me for the Culture Crawl on KCCK. I'm Dennis Green, and this is part one of a two-part show where I interview Diana Nollen, who's been a powerful voice for arts and culture in the eastern Iowa area for more than 40 years in her role as the arts and entertainment editor at the Cedar Rapids Gazette. And I thought it would be fun, as she's getting ready to retire, to turn the tables and interview her for a change about her long and varied career. In part one, she reveals her most memorable celebrity interviews. Here it is. Hi, it's KCCK's Culture Crawl. I'm Dennis Green, and my guest today is Diana Nollen, a well-known entertainment reporter from the Cedar Rapids Gazette, who is getting ready to retire. Yep. And I thought, as you head into your post-Gazette time of life, that it would be fun to turn the tables and interview you.
Yeah, that's not nerve-wracking at all.
First off, welcome.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to have you here. We, of course, have been friends for years and years. And I guess I think that, you know, when you're putting on an arts and entertainment event, I'd like to think there are three places you want to make sure you get to. And one of them is Everyday Iowa on Channel 9, which does a great job of promoting events. I'd like to think of the Culture Crawl as one. But definitely the big one is an interview or feature from Diana.
Oh, thank you.
You are leaving a big hole as the paper transitions to doing whatever it is that they're going to do. But this is not about that. This is about just having a chance to think back over all of those times. And I'm sure you have a few interviews, stories, experiences that you remember particularly well.
Yes, indeed.
Before we go there, though, for those who might only know you as the lady who writes those cool articles in the Gazette, you have had a really wide and varied career in the arts and in the media. So let's start going back a few years. Tell me about the beginnings of your career.
I owe my career to my late father, who, after my freshman year of college, went to the publisher of the newspaper in my hometown of Mediapolis and said, "My kid needs a job. Do you have anything she can do?" So he hired me, and so that was 1977, and I started writing during all of my, and selling ads, and developing and taking photos, and printing them, and doing layout, and all of the things you do in a small town paper. So I started doing that at all of my breaks from school, and then he held open the editing position for me when I graduated. So from 80 to 82, I was editor of the Mediapolis New Era at that time. And then two of my college friends who were living in Cedar Rapids, one was getting married and the other one then needed a new roommate. And they said, "Oh, quit your job and come up here. You'll find something to do." And I said, "Okay, I've got $1,000 and a new suit." And so I moved up in 82 and found a job within a couple of weeks. And then luckily a couple of weeks later, the Gazette called. So that began my 42-year journey with the Gazette. But I also took a hiatus and worked at Theater Cedar Rapids for 14 years, but I kept writing for the Gazette as a freelancer and doing concert reviews. So I consider that my whole 42 years with the paper. But I started out as the youth theater director at Theater Cedar Rapids for 4 years, and then the resident costume designer for 10. I used all facets of my good old Central College education.
That's the value of a liberal arts education.
You betcha.
Have you ever put a pencil to how many interviews you've done?
I have not, but this summer, so my college music friends and I get together every year, a couple of times a year. One couple has a boathouse at Ellis, and so that's Party Central. And one is a chef, and so we try to bring things that won't embarrass us because he brings lavish things. And so one of them looked up on a website I wasn't familiar with. She put my name in, and just for a few years, there were 5,000 hits under my name.
Wow.
Yeah, so maybe almost double that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, across 42 years.
Yeah.
Because your publication credits continue even when you weren't working full time there.
Yeah, exactly.
We've done 1,000 culture crawls.
Yeah, isn't it crazy?
Yeah.
So,
it adds up after a while.
It really does. And when I look through our archives that go back, the ones I can access easily, go back to the early 90s. If I put in my name, not everything that I've written shows up for some bizarre reason. But every now and then I'll stumble across a story I wrote and I go, "I wrote that? I don't remember writing that." Or "I talked to her? how can I not remember talking to her? So it's been so many that I just can't remember them all.
How do you prep getting ready to interview somebody?
I like to, when it's a really big star, I like to do about 2 hours of just deep diving on the internet and whatever the publicist provides me, which is sometimes, better than others. And I try to think of some questions that maybe they haven't been asked 10,000 times before.
That's the trick.
It is very tricky. The day I was supposed to interview Stevie Wonder, I was just like a basket case the whole day. I was really young in my 20s, and he was super popular coming to Carver Hawkeye, and he was supposed to call me that day. It's one of those where he will call me, I don't call him. And he never called. And I was so bummed. And his publicist apologized, and she said that when he gets up in the morning, he immediately goes to the keyboard and starts composing and playing and loses all track of time until somebody comes and says, hey, it's time to go to your concert. So I'll give him a pass on that one. But my 20-something self was so bummed. But my goal with each interview is to hear at least once, that's a really good question. And then I feel like, oh, good, I came up with something. Then I also try to find something that might be an icebreaker, which backfired once, and I will not name the name, but there was an artist I really appreciated, and his father worked out in Delaware, the same company my brother did, and I've been out there a million times, and I mentioned that, and apparently I hit some trigger because he shut down, and I'm like, oh no.
Had a bad experience with that company or something.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
And
don't you hate that when that happens?
It derailed the whole interview, and he gave me answers that were kind of not great. And I thought, you're talking to a journalist, and I'm recording this, and I'm going to write. I'm not going to make him look stupid or bad, but that was really disappointing. And to this day, when one of his songs comes on the radio, I kind of shudder. But there's only a couple of times. There's another one where I think the artist was super duper shy, I try not to ask yes and no questions. That's a cardinal rule of journalism. And I got just nothing out of her. And I hung up, and I said to my editor, oh, there's not enough for a full story out of there. So I called the event organizer and got a lot of information to surround the few comments that I was able to get out of the artist. And I mean, she's still wonderful, and, I still admire her, and I just think she's so painfully shy that talking to the media is like, oh no, don't make me do that again.
There have to be some, you mentioned Stevie Wonder as a big miss.
Yeah.
There have to be some that when I say, what are your favorites, the most meaningful, the most fun? Let's do it by category a little bit. Okay. Who do you think is the biggest person you ever interviewed?
Oh, Salman Rushdie.
Oh, sure.
And a lot of people won't know that name, but he wrote the Satanic Verses, and the Ayatollah put out a fatwa on him, which meant any...
under a death sentence.
Yeah, he was under a death sentence. Any practicing Muslim, if they saw him on the street, they were ordered to kill him. So he lived underground for 10 years in London, and he was coming to talk at Co. And so I had a face-on interview with him in one of the fancy, really beautifully appointed rooms in a building right across the street from Sinclair. And so we were just sitting face to face, and it was just, oh man, the guy is amazing. And it's also one of those interviews where he had just written a 700-page book about his years in hiding. And so I started off with that because I figured that's what he's going to talk about. And he goes, oh, nobody ever wants to know about that except, I said, journalists? He said, yes. And so then I'm tap dancing in my head. It's, oh my gosh. I said, well, I figure you must be able to breathe again when I saw you in Bridget Jones's Diary. And he just lit up. And he said that if he hadn't been an author, he would like to have been an actor. And all of his directing and producing buddies know that, so they give him cameos in their movies. So yeah, he was in New York and living, able to walk down the street without looking over his shoulder. And then, of course, we know a couple of years ago, he was attacked when he was giving a speech, but this was long before that. And so I count that as my coolest, biggest interview, just because the man is so amazing and he's so charismatic. Ugh.
Okay, most surprising.
This is awesome. Nobody has ever rendered me speechless. I got a call from Riverside Casino, And they said Rick Springfield was supposed to play that weekend, but he was ill. And so David Cassidy was going to fill in. He was going to perform instead. And if he called me in half an hour, could I interview him and put him in the paper the next day? And I said, yes, I can interview him, but the feature pages are advance run. And so they've already gone to press. But I can put something in the following day news section, and it'll still be a day or two out from the weekend. So she said that was fine. So I didn't have time to do anything. And I thought, oh, he's somebody from my childhood, whatever. The phone rings 30 minutes later. The caller ID says David Cassidy. And I couldn't breathe. And I answered the phone, and nothing would come out of my mouth. And finally, I just went, and I said, I'm sorry, there's a 16-year-old screaming inside my head. And he goes, oh, bless you. And then we were off and running with the interview. So that was really fun. And the other one that left me speechless was when I answered the phone, it was, hey, it's Harry. How you doing? And I'm like, oh, my God, it's Harry Connick Jr. Oh, my God, what am I going to... And it's breathe. You have questions on your screen. Just start talking. And he was wonderful to talk to. But he was coming to reopen the Paramount Theater after the flood. And I'm a huge fan of Harry Connick Jr. And he goes, I'm driving into the city. If the call drops, I'll call you back. I said, okay, great. After about 10 minutes, the call dropped. And I thought, well, I've got enough to write. And then the phone rings again. I pick it up and he goes, hey. And I'm like, oh, my God. It's Harry Connick Jr. Yeah.
Another hard one.
Harder than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Idina Menzel, it was in her pre-Frozen days. So she had been a big deal in Rent. And she was doing her barefoot, it's either barefoot at the symphony or barefoot with the symphony. And she was coming to Des Moines, to the Civic Center. And this was when we didn't have Hancher. So I was going to Des Moines and covering a lot of things there because every time I go to Des Moines, I see lots of Cedar Rapidians. And I was really looking forward to her. As a theater major and a fangirl, I was really excited. And my first question just kind of fell flat because the publicist had made clear. I said, now, do you travel with an orchestra, a group, or... And she said, no, she works with the orchestra that's in the city. But a lot of times people who come and perform with a symphony bring their own immediate ensemble with them.
Or at least a pianist.
Yeah. So that's what I meant. And I think she thought I meant, does she travel with an 80-piece orchestra? And it was a Saturday morning and it was an interview where I had to keep pulling everything out. And it's not her fault. I love Idina Menzel. And so I'm not trying to diss her or anything. I got a good story out of it. And when I went to the concert, she pushed Rod Stewart off the top of my pedestal as the best concert I'd ever seen. And then Rod Stewart came back to Cedar Rapids with his big sort of Vegas style. And then he knocked Idina down one notch. But I still loved her. And it was just a hard interview when I didn't expect it to be.
My chat with Diana continues in the next episode, where she tells us which celebrity was the most fun to interview and also her favorites from our local scene. Join me next time for part 2 with Diana Nollen on The Culture Crawl. You can hear The Culture Crawl live on the radio most weekdays at 10:30, on demand at kcck.org/culture, or subscribe using your favorite podcast player. Watch our videos on the KCCK Facebook and YouTube channels. Our producer is Lydia Kilgore. The Culture Crawl theme is composed by Vivian Shanley. I'm Dennis Green, and I'll talk to you later.